Hi friends, last week I talked to you about Indiana's childcare crisis, and I was focused on the most recent cuts to support for low-income families so that they could go to work. Unfortunately, what that means is those cuts have led to more than 25,000 low-income families no longer having access to affordable childcare and thus no longer able to go to work and support their families. That's a true crisis for those families. But the reality is, unfortunately, in Indiana, there was a child care crisis for the majority of Hoosier families across the state already. Back in 2024, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce commissioned a study that showed that $4.2 billion is lost every year in Indiana. That's economic activity and tax revenue coming to the state. And that loss is the result of families not being able to access child care. It's too expensive for most of our families. Today, it's $12,000 on average, sometimes much more, to send your infant to childcare. It's $10,000 on average to send your toddler to childcare. Imagine paying that for one child, let alone two or even three. The result of these incredibly high costs is that many parents are opting out of the workforce. Disproportionately, this is moms, and it's setting back their careers and, of course, their ability to support their families and have a good quality of life. Now, the other problem is just basic access. There are wait lists in many of our communities. Today in Westfield, Indiana, if you're pregnant and starting to think about childcare so that you can go back to work after the baby comes, you may be told your wait list is 12 months or 18 months or longer. You may have to opt out of the workforce at that point simply because you can't find childcare in your community. It turns out that about 1/2 of Hoosiers live in a child care desert. That's representing about 2/3 of our counties. This is a crisis for Hoosier families. The private sector provides child care in Indiana, and that's a good thing. But the reality is, the private sector can't provide high-quality childcare in all of our communities without state support. This is just a fact. Childcare is critical infrastructure, and it requires state intervention to work in Indiana. States across the country are figuring this out. They're coming up with solutions to make sure that all communities have high-quality childcare. These solutions range from tax credits for families to paid family leave for families, a range of other solutions, strategic investments to shore up the child care system so that families have access and can afford child care, so that they can go back to work, so that those families can thrive. Friends, Indiana will never be a family-friendly state until we solve this crisis. So I have two calls to action for you today. Please call Governor Braun and ask him to stop the child care cuts to CCDF. That's the program I focused on last week. And call your state legislator and ask them to work right now while we're in the legislative session to fund solutions to improve our child care system. This is critical. We need to do this now. Thanks, friends. Keep having your voice heard.